Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 7th chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes belongs in the genre of Old Testament wisdom literature, and wisdom is found and imparted throughout the Bible, and what the Bible has to say about wisdom is germane to life. Nevertheless, it does have a specific focal point of concentration in a genre, which are known as wisdom literature. There are 3 books, 2 of which were authored by Solomon, and the other is authored by an anonymous author, but it's the book of Job. But Solomon is the principal figure in the Hebrew wisdom tradition. He was a sage king, the personification, embodiment, and actualization of the Platonic ideal of a philosopher king, in whom power and wisdom were united in one, administering justice equitably and just governing so effectively, and really this golden age came about through his wisdom. But later in life, he is writing Ecclesiastes. These are his most mature musings, and he's beginning to. Whereas in the book of Proverbs, he seems to have all the answers. The wisdom that he has gives him all the answers, and the guidelines that he provides for life, practical daily guidelines and wise sayings. And much of what we read in the range we're going to cover today, we're actually reading Proverbs, and we'll discuss what that is more fully as the discourse develops. But for now, we're going to begin our review in the 6th chapter. And Solomon uses strong language such as evil and evil sickness and just malignant stuff in his vocabulary. And he describes it as an evil, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and esteem, so that his soul lacks none at all of what he desires, but God does not permit him to eat of it, and a foreigner consumes it. This is futile, and it is an evil disease. Solomon was this man. He had been given, in addition to wisdom, he was given riches, prestige, and prominence, and to unprecedented, unrivaled, unduplicated, and unequaled extents. And the endowment, in the biographically significant moment in his life when he was 19 years old, recently ascended to the throne, and he was given a blank slate to ask for whatever his heart's desire was. So his heart's desire, he asked for wisdom, but now that he's had all the wealth and stuff, he's getting away from the God who gave it to him. And because of that, he is unsatisfied, even though he has all the money in the world. Solomon makes these observations from the top of the world. He was the unique recipient of divine grace, and he was a king whose wish was his subjects' commands, anything he wanted, but he was unable to enjoy and find satisfaction in it, so he debases this and demeans it all to another species of futility, and not only that, but an evil disease. Strong language, no longevity of life or number of children, progeny, both considered bestowals of divine favoritism in the ancient world, is going to mean anything if you are unable to enjoy the life that you have, and if you are not given a dignified burial and a superior state of existence, which we have never been born, than to have all these things and just to not be able to enjoy it, because the stillborn does not have to endure the grief and the agony of life. He describes it as life itself as futility. It's defined by futility, and it is ended and enveloped in darkness. Yet this one who is stillborn has more rest than man, who toils for no obvious or even apparent purpose. So Solomon is a man on a quest and a search for satisfaction. And he says this in the 7th verse: all the labor of man for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. That's because many people's mouths and not their minds are their masters. So the carnal creature, they live for basically immediate gratification, and yet all the food in the world, no matter how much you indulge in, you need more. All the sex, all the drugs, and what is one really working for this repetitive cycle of no lasting satisfaction for all the things that he works for. He can, whet his appetite, but he cannot satisfy it, not permanently so. For what advantage has the wise over the fool? What does the poor have who knows how to walk before the living? That life is better lived with wisdom is self-evident and axiomatic amongst wise people. It enables us to navigate through skill life skillfully and with minimum damage in the chaos which envelops us. But where all the wisdom in the world cannot prevent the day of our death. And as early as the second chapter, Solomon bemoans the futility. What advantage has the wise over the fool? And for that matter, in the third chapter, what advantage has man over the beast, the dominant feed species? We meet the same dreaded destiny as all the lesser life forms. So what is the meaning? What is the purpose of all this? Then in the 11th verse, he says, the more words, the more futility. What is the advantage to a man? One of the signs of a fool is a proliferation of world. Fools are by nature self-aggrandizing, self-advertising creatures whose foolishness is more obvious than the subtleties of the wise. So the fool says a whole lot, but they don't say really a whole thing. Now, Proverbs, the literary device which proliferates in the book of Proverbs, there are 678 of them, and according to 1 Kings 4:32, Solomon composed 3,000. So we read of everything we're going to read in the section. The first 14 verses of the 7th chapter of Ecclesiastes are poetry, more specifically Proverbs, and these describe the benefits and blessings of wisdom. But in the 15th through the 29th verse, it reverts back to prose, and it bemoans the limitations of wisdom. But now Proverbs are concise sayings of condensed wisdom. They really pack a punch. They cultivate what the author Ernest Hemingway called the iceberg effect. So if you picture an iceberg, what lurks below is always substantially larger than what is laying on top. So with they say a whole lot with as little words. There's an economy of words. And one need to look no further than the Book of Mormon to see how foolish the words are. Now, as a literary, I'm just going to read to you a single verse and a single sentence from this book. Alma, chapter 60, 16. You shouldn't have one of these, but yea, had it not been for the war which broke out among ourselves, yea, were it not for these kingmen who caused so much bloodshed among ourselves, yea, at the time we were contending among ourselves, if we had united our strength as we had hitherto have done, yea, had it not been for the desire of power and authority which those kingmen had over us, they had been true to the cause of freedom and united with us and gone forth against our enemies, instead of taking up their swords against us, which was the cause of so much bloodshed among ourselves. Yea, if we had gone forth against them in the strength of the Lord, we would have dispersed our enemies, for it would have been done according to the fulfilling of his words. How does one exegete such a passage? This army that never existed was contending against an army that never existed. Now, there is some truth imparted in the Book of Mormon. It's mostly the same annoying penchant for run-on sentences, but there are several self-evident axiomatic conceptions there, but they are jumbled in the strangest syntax, and occasionally you come across something that is... You pick this up and you say either this book is true, the Bible, or the Book of Mormon is true. Both of these cannot be correct. So there is a lot of strange stuff in there, sparse strategically in between. But, we don't teach lies and the communication of truth through lies. The historicity of this book never happened. It is the manifestly false history of an allegedly fully Christian pre-Columbian civilization of people of Hebrew descent who supposedly flourished on the American continents for 1,000 years, and they had all these predictions of the Christ to come, but there is exactly zero archaeological evidence to corroborate the historicity claims of this book. And, their false pharisaical prophets preside over a twisted system of satanic lies, chief of which is that man can become God. Now, they have the beautiful temples, they have, the best-looking people, great hair, all these things. They're known as the ones who have family, but why? What are they trying to teach? That we can become God. The doctrine, it's not a doctrine. A doctrine is, by definition, an eternal truth. The erroneous doctrine of eternal progression as taught by the founder and preserved in all subsequent generations, that man can become God, not only debases God, he was once one of us. So, the Catholic Church teaches works, salvation by works. They teach that we can actually work our way up to God, and that goes against the grain of everything we believe. So they are Christian in name, calling themselves, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't make them Christians, but the literary quality of this book is self-evidently inferior, as are the theological claims, yet they all swear by it. But we don't want to get trapped in the teaching of lies. We're going to return to the 12th and final verse of our review. For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his futile life, which he passes like a shadow? For who declares to man what shall be after him under the sun? This is a great unanswerable question, and one of the perplexities and enigmas of life that are explored throughout the discourse, or rather series of discourses, which are the book of Ecclesiastes, which is, remember, motivated by a man's quest for satisfaction, and he does not know the answer. But this is a distinct transition in the narrative. The first 6 chapters are his observations. The 7th through 12th are his conclusions. So the densest proliferation of the words wise and wisdom, remember this is Old Testament wisdom literature, appear in the 7th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. It has the most to say about wisdom itself. Prior to this point is applied wisdom in the observation of this of everything that transpires under the sun. Now he speaks about wisdom itself, and Proverbs 8 and Job 28 enjoy the similar distinction in the other books of Old Testament wisdom literature. First verse, 7th chapter, lesson itself. A name is better than precious oil, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. A name is more than a name. Names actually meant something to the biblical Hebrew people. It was synonymous with one's character and or reputation, and so a reputation is of course a more precious commodity. One cannot put a price on a reputation as they can expensive perfume or precious oil, depending on the translation. But the point is that the luxuries of life that can be bought should not be bought at the expense of the priceless luxuries, the stuff you cannot, the one whose value is beyond monetary. So it is good to have a good name. So better to be poor and honest than to be rich and a thief. And the day of death superior to the day of one's birth. This brings us back to the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, the first of 14 paired stanzas, the time to in verses 2 through 8. The first of which is a time to be born and a time to die. And Solomon declares the day of one's death superior to the day of our birth, but for different reasons than we Christians do. We Christians can rejoice in death because then our spirits will be united in heaven, and when he returns, and the resurrection takes, we'll rise along with the raptured saints. But he's so sick of life that he's just, almost aching or begging for the sweet release of death at this stage of his life. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of fat feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living take it to heart. The heart of the wise are inclined to the death, the fact, and confronting the uncomfortable and unpleasant reality we all much contend with, that we all, our lives have a very limited shelf life, so to speak, while we walk on this earth. So it is. You don't want to be abnormally obsessed and fixated on the day of one's death, but it's still healthy to confront it. You're going to learn more about pain and sorrow than you do in feasting and frivolity, which are just cheap escapes that avoid what the wise men have to do. If you are not prepared to die, you are not prepared to live. So much of wisdom consists in recognizing and respecting the fact that one day we will die, and what are we doing to prepare for it now? And remember the first verse, we land in heaven the day we die. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the face the heart becomes better. Taking educated of value and or any value at all from pain or sorrow or anguish was a distinctly unique Judeo-Christian traditions. All the ancients despised pain and sorrow, but the Jews embrace it as a refining fire, and as do we Christians. And to quote the Venerable Charles S. Spurgeon, the path of sorrow and that alone takes us to the path where sorrow is unknown. So sorrow and pain and just unpleasantness has taught me everything I know about my life, myself, and my God, and I have not learned one lick or one iota from pleasure or happiness or anything else. So wise people embrace the sorrow, and this takes us back to the 18th verse of the first chapter, where he explains that the price of wisdom is greater grief. The heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of rejoicing. So like gravitational orbits, do these snares attract their magnets. The wise person thinks about death, embraces death, respects and acknowledges, and is there to show class and dignity and courtesy and respect for the dead. But the fools, they have this life on this earth, and because it is all they have, they are living to satisfy their stomach now and party and live life because it's so short. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. This is consistent with Proverbs 17:10. Remember, these are Proverbs that he is writing, and some of them do have echoes in the book of Proverbs. This is one of them, Proverbs 17:10. Also declares the superiority of the wounds of a friend to the kisses of an enemy. But that could be another proverb in there. But the point that is communicated in both is that criticism is constructive and is the mark of a friend. A friend is not afraid to tell you what you need to know in a gentle, loving, compassionate manner in order that you may benefit from it and grow from it. And a friend must know how to hurt the one that he loves if he has to be a true friend, because a brother is born for adversity. But the song of fools, that is flattery, that is empty air, that is vanity, that without substance, without meaning, without purpose. It is elusive and it has no tangible substance, because the best that a fool can do is flatter you, and flattery is not communication, it is manipulation. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of a fool. That too is futile. Laughter is another one of the things that takes us back to the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes. Most of these things are in there. Mourning and dancing and crying and laughing. So we hear laughing once more, but more specifically the laughing of fools, which is an unpleasant sound. It is an assault on Solomon's heirs, and so he debases it and demeans it to the same status of futility that he does everything else. For oppression makes a wise one mad, and a bribe destroys the heart. The fact and sight and existence of oppression that he could do nothing about, even in his capacity as an absolute monarch. There was lower level corruptions. Even though he himself administered justice equitably, there were many underlings who exploited their positions of prestige and power to oppress others, and this saddened his heart. Solomon did have a heart as well as a mind. He was a human being with extraordinary insight and compassion into the lives of his underlings. And the questions that he asked are asked by everyone on every continent, just not as articulately as we read in him. But bribe just exacerbates the pre-existent corruption. It just corrupts, and a wise person accepts a bribe, they cease to be wise, at the very least for that moment in time, but it does have a contaminating ripple effect. When you sacrifice your integrity for monetary profit, you lose your soul and your wisdom, because everyone has their price, but the wise cannot be bought. It's been said that everyone has their price, but the mark and measure of a wise one is one who cannot be bought. They have that much integrity. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. things will get better. This is the essence of hope, which is essential for hope is the engine which enables us to endure the struggle and navigate it through there, and with the knowledge that there is a better there is a promised land, a better life. So this life will be, from humble beginnings grow great things. And the best things in life are worth waiting for. So far better to be patient than to be proud and want it now and just want to accelerate its arrival. You have to endure and be patient. And all these things. Do not be hasty in your spirit to be provoked, for wrath rests in the bosom of fools. A fool is easily provoked because they take everything personally. It is me, myself, and I. The fool is a self-centered creature, and they resort to wrath when their ego is assaulted. And it is a sure sign of a lack of wisdom to be confrontational. A confrontational person lacks the quality of discretion, which is one of the specific components of the ingredient elixir of wisdom, which consists of knowledge, understanding, discretion, discernment, and prudence, and maybe a few other synonyms of intelligence that we read, specific species of intelligence that we read of in the book of Proverbs. Do not say, why are the former days better than these? For it is not wise of you to have asked about this. The unrealistic, the illusory, the imaginary nostalgia, and it has been said that those who long for the good old days have a bad memory and an overactive imagination. These idyllic pictures that we paint in our head seldom bear any reality. We long for a return to the days of simplicity. But one of the benefits of living in a society as complex as the one that we live in is that we have medical advances. So and technology does enable things. But in any case, focus on the here and now. Do not long for the past, but work towards the future and make a difference in the present. This is a marked measure of the wise. The wise are not enslaved or imprisoned by the past, or just longing for an idyllic existence that quite frankly never was. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and an advantage to those who seize the sun. So even though he speaks somewhat disparagingly of wisdom in this radically unorthodox book of wisdom literature, he exposes the limitations of wisdom beginning in the first chapter and more fully in the seventh, the section that's going to be beyond the range we cover today. But here he affirms the advantages of living with wisdom. Those who see the sun, now the wise walk in light, but the fools walk in darkness, we read in the second chapter. And because the wise walk in light, they have perception and perspective, the panoramic view, the big picture. That is the marked measure of the wisdom, the ability to construct the panoramic puzzle of all items of information combined and considered. For wisdom protects as silver protects, but the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Wisdom is a source of security. It is a defense and an ever-present help in times of danger, and it enables us to survive and triumph over dangers. So there is that defensive, but more positively, it provides a definite advantage, a certifiably self-evidently that life is better lived with wisdom, and wisdom consists of knowledge and understanding. So on the pyramid of wisdom, knowledge is the lowest tier. This refers to the items of information, but a knowledgeable person will be able to cite the facts, but an understanding person will be able to connect the pieces. They will understand the underlying cause of the truth and why they understand why something is true, not that it is true, but the wise are at the very top of the pyramid. These are the ones, if knowledge is the ability to take the puzzle apart Wisdom is the ability to put it together and have the whole panoramic view, just the whole big picture, the broad range vision in totality. And, maybe the knowledgeable one is stuck in the minutia of the details. So even as we increase in wisdom, we cannot decrease in knowledge. And the life, it does not necessarily ensure the longevity of life, although the wise person will make healthy physical health choices that can prolong their life. They're not going to be addicted to drugs or alcohol or anything. But he's also speaking of the qualitative enhancement of life. He's not guaranteed. So wisdom will not necessarily add years to your life, but they will add life to your years. It's a qualitative enhancement more so than a quantitative one. See the work of God, for who is able to make straight what he has made crooked? One cannot resist the almighty sovereignty of, one can neither resist, understand, comprehend, or control what God has made straight and why what he has been made crooked, but the same immutable irresistibility exists in whatever he determines, whatever he decrees. That is what it is, because he wills it. So everything that we find in the universe we have to accept as part of his providential plan, no matter how unpleasant or painful or undelightful. And the severity of the negative circumstances can stimulate the necessity of faith in ways that are not possible otherwise. Be glad in the day of your prosperity, but in the evil day take note that God has also appointed the one as well as the other, so that man should not uncover whatever is after him. Fair weather faith and foul weather faith are both necessary for the complete picture, the fullness of our faith. We have to, now the danger and temptation and challenge is that when the Bible's not, God's not against you having things, he's just against things having you. The Bible says, if riches increase, set not your heart upon them. And what happens is that as once godly people get richer, riches can become their God. They can become their preeminent priority and focus and concentration, thinking on it constantly, making sacrifices for it, loving it, looking at it as the end-all, be-all, the panacea to all their problems. But we also have to cultivate the days of adversity in as much as prosperity, because if the sun goes up and rises in the east and rises in the west, that means what comes up in our life has to come down. Solomon was already past the prime of his life. He had built the temple, his life's mission and purpose, by the age of 30, inherited the throne at 19. He had already lived a successful life by a very early age. But, he's 20 plus years later, he's, not the same man he once was. But I just want to close with the words of Michael A. Eaton, author of Ecclesiastes and introduction and commentary. He says this about verse 14. Both prosperity and adversity have their uses. One leads to joy, the other draws attention to the realities of life, and leaves, if so allowed, to a life of faith in a sovereign God. Both are subject to God's will and part of his providence. The constant fluctuation between them keeps us dependent, not on our own guesswork, but on God, who holds the keys to all unknown. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.